Hi, everybody. Michael McGinnis here with The Ripple Effect, and fascinated here to have our very first guest here, Richard Hughson. Richard, very special person to me. You know, we experienced a lot together, beginning with where we live. Richard lives on the opposite side now. I'm here in San Diego, Richard in Rochester, New York, and I'd lived many years in Rochester and came to know Richard through the experiences that we had in terms of what was called the Sanctuary of the Beloved. And it was really a culmination of those people who were on a quest for spirituality and spiritual search. And it was really fascinating. Of course, in common, what we had was this person, Tom Sawyer, as an acquaintance. And this is really what I wanted to talk about today, is really the ripple effect from quite an amazing person who had an impact on a lot of people, and hear from Richard's perspective. But Richard's unique in fact that he probably has the longest acquaintance with Tom Sawyer. And that from there, a lot of different experiences, but really just to talk about the impact that Tom Sawyer had on Richard. So Richard, welcome, first of all.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's fantastic. And so let's just begin is in terms of thinking is Tom Sawyer, right? How long did you know him? And can you think back of when you first met with him and maybe share a little bit about that experience, and ultimately we'll work towards, what impact did that have on you? So, but first, how long have you known him, and when did you really first meet with Tom?
My very first in-person meeting with him was 90, 91, I forget exactly which. I figured out once I knew him for 17 years. And what, unbeknownst to me, I was a friend to him for all that time. Because he seemed to know me immediately. I attended one of his local talks here in Rochester, New York, and I'm sitting kind of in the back of the room off to one side. I'm watching him talk, and and he's got this fellow sitting next to him, which I found out later was Steve Sommerfeld. Whenever Tom would be stuck for a word, he would turn to Steve, and Steve would fill in, trying to find the word that Tom had. And I thought that was pretty neat. That was great. And as I kept watching, I thought, this is a nice guy. I like him. Things are look very, nothing came up that would chase me away, make me question, what is this real or is this not? And as I'm watching, I'm thinking to myself, well, this is really nice. I'd like to be his friend and be able to help him out like this too. And the moment I thought it, he looked right at me, dead eye contact, and nodded. What? And I kind of like, wait a minute, what was that? And he looks at me again like, oh, geez.
Like the teacher to the kid in the classroom or something, like, am I in trouble or something?
Not am I in trouble. It's like, yeah, almost like, why am I in trouble for being surprised that he heard my thought? That was the feeling of it. Like, doesn't everybody just hear your thoughts and come on, get over it. This is normal. Let's move on with this. And I'm kind of scratching my head over that when he starts talking about his bicycle racing days and how many times he woke up in a hospital after falling off his bicycle, and talking about how when you get hurt real bad, you can readjust your tolerance for pain, the level of pain that you're accustomed to. You can it is possible to immediately readjust what you're familiar with, and become not at ease with it, but become accepting of it. And as he said that, as he was finished saying that, And then he said, some of you in this room know what I'm talking about. And there was that dead eye contact again, straight at me. And I went, oh yeah, he's talking about when I broke my leg 20. Wait a minute. How could he know that I broke my leg 20 years ago? And he looks at me again with that same sort of like, oh, geez, we've got to go through this with you. Like
Really
I'm supposed
interesting.
to already be at ease with him reading my mind.
So was that something you had experienced before with anybody else? Was this
No,
new?
no, no.
So how
I,
did
I had
you,
I
had
had
you,
times where, well, give me a second here. I had times where, with a good friend, you would have the same idea at the same time, but not absolutely. I know exactly what you just thought. You know, I can refer to something in your life that from 20 years ago, and before I knew you. I'd never had that kind of an experience.
so you had a feeling, something inside you was leading to that conclusion that he's reading my thoughts. He's knowing something about me.
He clearly knew more about me than I knew he knew. Could point to things in my life and make comments about them. Um, as I came to know him and attended many of his talks and then actually traveled the world with him, he called these zingers that he would know prior to the talk. He would know some of the people and some of the zingers he would be delivering, but once he got there and saw the people, that number of zingers would increase. So what happened in his talks is that he could be talking about any subject whatsoever, from trucks backfiring to from his hot rod pickup truck to quantum mechanics, but he would drop these little zingers in there in such a way that no one else except the person who they were aimed at would catch on. So everybody got a personal, I don't know if everybody, but a lot of people in the audience would get a very personal assistance with problems in their life or situations they were dealing with, while no one else in the audience caught on, and he just talked right along. He was well known for that, actually.
So you said you attended a talk, and he had this near-death experience, never really talked about it. There's the videos on YouTube about his near-death experience. What was it that you recall about the experience, his experience, in effect, that really caught your attention?
I think what sticks in my mind most is his absolute authenticity, his absolute honesty. And when he was talking, you get no sense that he's trying to uh, upgrade the situation, no sense of trying to make it sensational or score any, hey, look at me points whatsoever. But his involvement in the moment of everything he was talking about was honest and real. And he would get emotionally upset at times and have to stop and clear his throat or look down, or you'd see his eyes water tearing up a little bit. As our friendship went on, I took to the habit of sitting somewhere in the back of the room where I could still make eye contact with him. And when he would get caught up in the emotion of a story he was telling, he would look at me and I would nod, or I would say motorcycles or trains, planes, and airplanes, or trains, planes, and automobiles. That movie. I forget who was
John Candy, and
John
yes,
Candy. Yes,
yeah.
he liked that movie. It's something to bring him a little back down to earth, so that he could, so he would not be overwhelmed by the emotions and could carry on. That sense of his emotional involvement in it seemed very, very, very real. And while he's telling a spectacular, amazing story, you just were totally with him because of that his emotional connection to it. It was clearly not faked in any way, and the realness of it would hit you pretty strongly.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Was Tom always like this, or was this all a result of his near-death experience?
Oh no, he was not Mr. Emotion previous to the near death.
Yeah,
He
and
was
so
a
that's
very
something I'd love to hear your perspective, because I know the person I met, and I heard the stories of who he was and his own description and others, and I was like, wow, this is it's interesting because of his background. I found how would
yeah.
you describe who he was before his near-death experience?
He was a hard man with a good heart and a wonderful sense of humor. But what is in his life, he had absolute rules and demanded uh, absolute demanded his children uh, and people around him absolutely follow them. Uh, One of the stories was a fellow at work working as a carpenter. A fellow came over and borrowed a particular tool. Oh, sure, yeah, go ahead, no problem at all. The next week, the guy came back, wanted to borrow the tool again. No, well, why not? Because you've had a paycheck since then. Meaning, the guy now knows he needs that tool. He should have gone out and bought one. You do not just keep borrowing a tool from someone. And if you borrow a tool, you return it in better condition than you got it. You know, it had hard line rules uh, for how to live life.
Yeah, and I think that's what caught me was the fact is that his self-proclaimed blue collar worker, worked
Yeah,
for the town of Greece, on equipment, sort of the opposite that you would think about from who he was afterwards with respect to all this incredible awareness, right? And he was just I like that word hard. To me, he was a driver, a hard worker. He loved cars, from what I remember, really worked on them,
yep.
and lived a very typical blue collar lifestyle. But then how would you describe him post his experience?
To becoming one of the most loving, understanding, accepting people I have ever met in my life. To For him to realize who someone was, where they were coming from, what their life had been, and therefore this is where they are, and be in absolute acceptance of that and lovingly want to help them move forward spiritually from wherever he met them. It was to show the breadth of that. It was that he was I when I met him, was starting to have the back problems. He had an operation fusing some of the discs together, and in his own words, his abilities were decreasing. And I've known him for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years at least. And he wanted to hug everybody I mean, he never hugged anyone before his experience, but was hugging everyone afterwards. And I remember standing and watching, and I happened to look at him across the room, and he hugged this woman, and he stood back and he looked at her, and he moved in and shared a hug again, then stepped back and went along like, okay, this is what it is. And I thought that was really odd. Usually there's the hug and there's a closeness and maybe some personal comments, but for him to take a step back, a questioning step back and hug again was unusual. He mentioned later that as his abilities were decreasing, that was the first time that he had hugged someone and did not immediately know their full life history. He came back from this his experience with a lot of responsibility, spiritual responsibilities on this earth, and a lot of abilities to accomplish them, and that remarkable sensitivity to know people, and like with me, read my minds, was just astonishing. And it was as much as I saw it and experienced it, I was still surprised by it many times.
Yeah, you talked about in going back responsibilities, and I had the chance to firsthand see and experience things that just constantly reaffirmed to me is this is real, right? You could go and watch a video, somebody, but really in having the experience of getting to know him, it became real because some of his gifts and abilities, you talked about it as the zingers, things like that, really you became aware of, which reaffirmed that this is real, and that to me had this really powerful effect of making it real more than just a passing story or something I read. And so is there a story or an example that you can think about one of his responsibilities, and just from what you recall of that, what it was and what he did and anything about that experience?
A specific, one of the main things that he came back with the job of was to, what in his words, anchor the blue light. And when pressed about what that meant, his comment was, it's like completing the circuitry of the earth, completing an electrical circuit. His job was to complete this circuitry of the earth for the for an upcoming spiritual transformation of the earth. That the blue light needed to be connected to very specific spots around the globe. So he and Carol Scoville were phenomenal at putting together the trips all over the globe: India, Nepal, Tibet, England, Wales, Germany, and Sedona, Arizona, of course. But to go someplace and do this extremely simple ceremony where you simply stood in a circle and you might hold hands if you could, and just be silent and be aware and allow. And so the first few times I'm doing that, I have this sense of, okay, this feels nice. I'm just going to let it be. And we got done. I don't know if I've completed it or not. But one time there was a moment where it was clear that a group of people had stood around a medicine wheel in Sedona, Arizona. And we did a little prayer. Somebody had a ceremony of some kind, and we're ready to leave. And I just was stuck with this feeling that this was just after Tom had died. And I was just stuck with this feeling that somehow we weren't done. I don't know what it was. I don't know why. I walked, as we're all about to go back and walk a hike back out of that area. I stopped, walked back to one of the points on the wheel, and stood there. And I simply stood, and I had the desire that 3 other people would take the other 3 points of the compass. But I somehow knew, don't speak, don't call to anyone, don't wave to anyone, just stand. And as I stood there and people are putting shoes on or getting coats or whatever. Pretty soon somebody looked up and walked over, saw me and walked over and stood at another point. And they just stood there silently. Pretty soon, a third person stood. And very quickly after that, the fourth person stood. And I held my arms out like this, and the other three did. And I swear, there was I want to call it an unseen but perceived tornado in the middle of that, just whipping around and around and around, and went way and way and way and way, way up. And I'm standing there with my arms out, and my thinking mind is saying, "You look like an idiot standing here." What are you, some kind of new age nutcase? Gonna stand here like, "Oh, look at me, I'm doing something." Whoa. But the reality of the feeling that tornado was truly there was strong enough to keep me standing there, and in spite of what my mind was thinking. And it took a surprisingly long time. It's like 2-3 minutes we stood there until that all ended. And I put my arms down and we all walked away and never said a word. It just felt perfect that the people who were supposed to be there were, and we accomplished it and then moved on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, because that's really the hope in this series, to capture these kinds of stories and experiences that will help those that, whether they're on the path, they're looking, they're inquisitive, it help from people like you and me, grounded, right? That had these sort of like experiences that often are hard to describe, as you just did, but yet, they're a portrait of this spiritual side of life, right? Of which Tom did a masterful job of sort of just helping to educate it based on the experience. I know as he shared his story, quite an amazing story. People really want to listen to it. Again, it's classic Tom to hear that it was him being crushed under a car, and he was an amazing mechanic, and to have had a car crush him here was just like, this couldn't be happening with me, but just what it led to, and of course his overall experience. Things. And interesting, you talked about grounding the blue light, and I was fortunate to be on a trip where he joined the group, and we were in Egypt at the time, Cairo, Egypt, and we had a ceremony for that purpose in the Great Pyramid. And so, I was there. I just, all I did is that I had accepted things. I didn't really have, at that time, any real unique experience. It just, for me, felt really good. And I knew there was something to this that I wanted to be a part of and learn. But it was the ceremony was held in the Great Pyramid, all each a story in themselves, how they developed, how we got there. And I can remember we were each holding a candle, one of those tall candles. It was lit, and then we had the ceremony. And there it was, and I look over at Tom, and the candle had totally melted in his hand. And it was just like, how did that? He was just holding it, and again, no surprise, these are the kinds of things you'd witness. But what was interesting was that at the end of that, Dan Chesbo, who was leading some of the ceremonies, had mentioned is that there's something about this visit that is going to lead to an event somewhat significant. What it is, I don't know, but that we'll all know relatively soon. And so I was like, wow, cool, okay, I was part of something. And sure enough, it was a week later that the Berlin Wall came down. And it was just like, okay, again, yes, if you look at any one of these cases, any one example, you could pick it apart and say, oh, coincidence or things like that. But after you go through a series of these events that I know you went through too, you begin to see a pattern and say, is wow, there's realness to this. Just like
Right.
you see in the tornado in front of you a few years ago, if you were younger, do you think you would have had the same impact, or would you would have run away?
Uh, I don't know how to answer that, but I want to add on to, I don't know what I would have done a few years earlier in my life. It was the perfect time to meet him. But to tag on to what you just described, he would often ask us to sit for an event or a person. Uh, and he would just ask his friends, and sometimes just a few. Sometimes he'd really try and get the word out that an event was important enough in his mind that he wanted a lot of people focused on it. And his uh, his instruction was a very simple: give energy to that person or that event or that place, that location. And one of these was a location in a military um, compound, an American military base somewhere in the Middle East. And Tom wanted the, the group of us to focus on that thing without telling us why. And rarely we got told why. And it went by, the time went by, and he thanked everybody. And then a piece came out in the paper. It was rare that something, that he didn't want to sensationalize, and he didn't want to say, hey, look what you guys did, you know, hooray, well, for us, we won. You did your job, now you move on. But it was occasionally important to give validation to the group that what what had occurred was beautiful because of us giving energy to it. And this situation was, there was the man driving a truck full of explosives that was going to drive into this compound and blow it up. It was going to be a suicide uh, thing, suicide event. All of his training, everything in his head, his entire life led up to completing this job. If he if he failed at it, he would be his compatriots would hunt him down and kill him. And if he somehow didn't, if he somehow backed out of it, his entire family would be hunted down and killed. So everything in his mind, everything in his thinking mind was, this is what I have to do and will be glorifying to me and to the world and his cause. But he stopped the truck short of the gate, got out, walked up to the gate, and was pleading excitedly for a translator. And the story he told was that at some, as he was driving along, what he suddenly felt were the hugs of 1,000 mothers. And he no longer wanted to hurt people. He only wanted to love them. And he explained what was in the truck. He explained what he was about to do. He explained the whole thing. And it was extremely well handled by our military, but impressive enough to have hit the newspapers. And Tom just wanted to give people that validation that what we were doing had some real world effect.
That powerful story,
That was, yeah,
isn't it?
yeah,
And just, I add to that, just, so I think these things, that validation just really, it helped, and it definitely helped. The validation is needed at times to just because it can be so unbelievable, right? That
Yeah,
this could be happening
exactly.
there. And I remember a very simple case. I was sitting in his home, fortunate like you have been able to have connected, befriended him. And we were sitting there and just talking about whatever it was. And through the conversation, he just stopped and said, "Oh, a bank just blew up in Colorado." And then went on the went on with our conversation. We said, "Wait a minute, wait, stop." I said, "What did you just say?" He said, "Oh, a bank just blew up in Colorado, and I said, "Okay, and can you tell me just what happened? How did you know that?" "Oh, that's just, one of the things that pick up whatever." And sometimes it's a mixed blessing, because sometimes it helps, and other times I
Yeah,
really don't want to know, which is why I just wanted to carry on the conversation,
yeah,
with me. And I said, "Okay, all right, but it happened." And he goes, "Okay, all right." So he went over to the TV, realized there was a little bit of that doubting Thomas, and turned the TV, and I think it was CNN at the time, and something. And it was about 15 minutes later. 15 minutes later, breaking news, bank blows up in Colorado, wherever it was. And I just was this mouth jaw dropping, my God, this is real. And that was just characteristic of it. And I recall his stories about his impact there with the bombing, the terrorist act, as well as,
yeah,
the whole case of playing a significant factor in what potentially could have been World War III, and the many little stories of how tidbits came out, in terms of doing it. And I remember one story as he was sitting in a restaurant, and all of a sudden there was something that occurred that was on the TV being spoken. He wasn't sure, but he asked for a napkin and he started writing things down. And so he was writing it, and all that came out was TYRE. And he goes,
yeah,
"What the heck is this? This tire is TIRE. Why
right.
TYRE?" Well, and anyways, that's just one of the cogs of the wheel that emerged at that point, allowing eventually to put pieces of a puzzle together that helped to really curtail what could have been a very major nuclear event. And so those are the kinds of things that I was just like, wow. And that's what caught me. Another example is you talked about this connection that he made. And he talked about one of his things about how he had just simply that day connected with a pilot. And he was very aware that that pilot had fallen asleep. And what he was aware about is that though that plane and another plane were about to collide. And so the only thing that he knew he could do is send that pilot love and affirmations. "I'm a good
Hug.
pilot. I'm a good, yes, and
He gave
I'm good
him
at
a
this."
Tom Sawyer hug.
That's right. And lo and behold, it was, of which, the story was out, near air collision, so that was the validation of it. But certainly was that part of which all of a sudden he was aware, woke up, and all of a sudden, oh my God, what's that? And sure enough, saw the plane just in time to be able to change course. But I guess this
Wow.
would be pre when they had all of these radar things on planes that they have to do today, but very
Right.
characteristic. So, with that culmination of events, and the things, and knowing him and befriending him, is that how would you describe the effect that Tom had on other people and Tom had on you? So you were around him enough to sort of see this impact that he had others, very often probably engaging in some conversation of it, but also, related to you. What was the ripple effect, in fact, of Tom being Tom that he had on you?
One of the biggest changes that occurred in my life was uh, soon after knowing him, I started doing clowning. I became a clown. That Visions of Tomorrow conference down in Geneseo, they would have a candlelight healing service on the last night of the week, and I was down there for the first time, and everybody's walking around doing nice things and everything's normal. Everything looks normal except the conversations is about all this highfalutin spiritual stuff. But on that night, all of a sudden, people came out in the craziest costumes you ever saw. For this kid who grew up in the country, to see these people come out in these gossamer things and, like, oh, look at me, I'm a wizard, I'm a healer, I'm a da, 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 just cracked me up. I was having fun in my mind while I was all, part of me is going like, oh my goodness.
Yes, what did I get myself into?
Exactly.
Oh, I'll never forget that. That
Well,
was my.
let me
Yes,
finish. Let me finish.
yes, please do, because I want to hear that impact. Yeah, on
Yeah.
you.
So the next conference, the next year, I had found a classic Poirot clown costume. All white with three big black buttons, and the sleeves that hang down. That Italian commedia dell'arte Poirot. It's an old old style clown, and I thought that's it. I'm gonna wear that right on to the next thing, just to make fun of these people and the outrageous costumes they're wearing. So I walked in on that night with this thing on, and Tom looks at me across the room, and his eyes immediately watered and got red. I'm thinking he's gonna laugh, like, ah ha ha, he's making, I'm making fun of these people too. But he was deeply emotional about it. Now, that's unusual. So I'm walking around saying hi to people and whatnot, and there was a Native American teacher there. I'm forgetting his name right now, but I just happened to be passing by him, and I said, "Share a hug," and he says, "Well, you're wearing that? You bet." He recognized it as a clown costume, and that told me to something about clowning was extremely important, and that opened a door in my head to, well, like my kids have said, every Halloween I dressed up as a clown. Like, oh, that's not just me being bereft of ideas for a Halloween costume as I took them around the neighborhoods. That was me wanting to be a clown, and it just blossomed from there. I have since had the opportunity to clown around the world, um, and not only to just do the clowning, but to know what I'm doing while clowning. That the ripple effect is I understand what the work of clowning is. There's lots of programs across the United States, across the world, about healing humor and caring clowns and the work they do in hospitals. And that's oh, that is marvelous, good work that these people are doing. But it's also in just normal birthday party or go to an event clowning, that the reason for me that I'm clowning is to do something good for these other people. That there's a really serious purpose behind this of brightening their lives. I was with someone once, and we went to Wegmans, the grocery stores here, and we had to go to the customer service desk. And the woman who came to wait on us uh, came with this, she kind of her eyes down, and what do you need? What do you want? Yep, I'll do that. And something happened nearby that I turned into a joke and pretended it meant something else. And she got laughing like crazy. By the time we left, she had this bright smile on her. She was standing upright, had a bright smile on her face, and said, "Bye." As we walked away, my friend says, "What were you doing?" Did you see the change in her? In that, I didn't do that for me. Look at me. Look how I can make you laugh. I did that for her so that her attitude changed. Look how much different her day is going to be after that moment. That's why I'm doing it. And I'll say that's why the majority of clowns, whether they are aware of it or not, that's what they're doing. That's my understanding of the value and one of the jobs of clowning is to help people come out of their whatever attitude they're in and come to a brighter spot, or just do a magic trick and leave them in a state of wonder that, how could that happen? Because that state of wonder is openness. That they are they may be going, and at that moment they're open to whatever may happen. If something, if spirituality wants to get to them or not, they're not blocked up with thoughts. I'm sorry to say this again, but they're just open, and that's a valuable place to be. It can be a valuable place to be.
Wow, what a beautiful story. And it sounds like, here was this experience of just through your life being a clown, dressing or whatever, to all of a sudden being a clown, and new meaning to the expression clowning around, in terms of and around the world, literally. And but it sounds, again, so characteristic, the verbiage and everything you used, really, I could tell, part of its origins from Tom because of how much he focused on attitude, and you're tying that in, just this impact that we can have by making that change to an attitude, and as an outsider, being able to be, momentary influence on a person maybe choosing a different attitude. And here you were, now from this experience and knowing him, finding a way of which to give back was something that you were sort of doing with a very different intention, now with the new intention of really truly helping people in their life.
It turns out that what Tom said about what he learned in his life review of his near-death experience matches what many, many, many near-death experiencers have said, was the thing that should change the world most were the tiny little things you never even realize you're doing. When you just smile at someone, when you have an honest smile at them, or when you reach out and help them just momentarily for who knows what reason. One of the things Mary was always amazed with is I happened to be in the right spot at the right time to be of this tiny little minor service to people. We're walking out of the theater one time, and some woman's putting on her coat, and she's reaching back, and she can't quite reach her other armhole, and I just picked the coat up, got it within her reach, and kept right on going. It was perfectly timed. Mary would look at me and go, "Why does that happen to you?" I don't know. It just does. It happened often enough to be a thing to get mentioned all the time.
Interesting.
Yeah, those kinds of things are very valuable in the world. To have the desire to be of help is where it starts from. You have not just thinking and choosing, but if you truly have honestly have the desire within you, that leads to more and more of this stuff occurring. I think long term, at this point, the biggest effect Tom has had on me is that awareness that how I treat every person I come in contact to has an accumulative effect on the world.
What a profound statement here, and a great way to conclude this session, Richard, is by sharing, the stories and the experiences, and just really what a great way to sort of encapsulize, Tom was, to really be able to begin to see that, because it certainly was true of me and many others that I saw making connections, was really to begin to make that conscious choice of being able to help others and the impact it had. Sometimes, very often, we'd never see the impact. But then in his stories, in his near-death experience, I remember where he would share that he was able to see the impact for events that he was not consciously aware of, both from a negative and a positive perspective, by going through that life experience that often, again, you hear of near-death experiences experiencing, as they come through the tunnel and have a chance to sort of review their life thing. And so, but I want to very much thank you, Richard, for sharing your time here today and thoughts, and we'll definitely have you back to really expand on this and maybe pursue a couple different thoughts and ideas that you've gained spiritually that might be very welcome to others on the path themselves. Would that work out?
Yes, and at the moment, I would like to share a Santa story. As you can see, I'm preparing for it's October 14th right now. I'm getting ready for the season. There was a family came in one time, long line of people. This family came in, 3 younger children and a 14-year-old girl with not a hair on her head. No eyebrows, no anything. Obviously dealing with chemo for some reason. And she had a scowl on her face and her head was down, and she was keeping her distance from the father, the mother, and her 3 siblings. Immediately I want to reach out to her, but I know she's going to just go, pfft. I mean, she's too old. She's doing this for the kids. She didn't want to be there. Like, come on, let's just get this over with. I don't feel good, blah, blah, blah. So I start talking to the kids and, what are you interested? What do you like? How's it in school? How old are you this year? All that stuff. They get all done and everything's fine. They're about to leave. I said, wait a minute. Would you like to know if you're on the good list? Their eyes pop open. Oh, you get to find out. Oh my goodness. There's 3 tests. You have to pass every one of them. The first one's very easy. It's just a high five. And they pop, high 3 high fives. Second one's also very easy. It's just knuckles. I hold my hand out and all 3 give me knuckles. The third one is the difficult one. And I turned to the mother and says, do you remember how scared you were when you had to do this with me? And she goes, yeah, sure. Not knowing what is going on whatsoever. And I told him, you have to do knuckles again. And this time it has to squeak. They're looking around. They don't know what. They don't know if they don't want to try. They're scared. They're worried to death. And it's, come on, Mom, show them how you did it all those years ago. I hold my hand up for her. She gives me knuckles and it squeaks. Unbeknownst to them, you can get a palm squeaker that fits under inside the glove. And you just go, He lights up. Oh my gosh. The kids are going, I want to try. So bink, 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 all 3 little kids do. And it's, come on, Dad, show them how you did it. I hold my hand up and he reaches out and goes, silence, nothing. He laughs, the mother laughs, the little kids are laughing, and the 14-year-old is laughing. And come on, Dad, do it right. Quit fooling around on me. And I hold my hand up again, squeak. He gets to squeak. They all laugh again. And on the way out, as they're walking away, that 14-year-old girl is completely transformed. She's looking up at her dad, talking and laughing with this giant smile on her face as they leave the set. That's the reason for doing this stuff.
Fantastic. What a great way to conclude this session, and very characteristic of you. Well, Richard, once again, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to having you back here soon.
I would look forward to it as well. Thank you.